Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen. It has been a while, hasn't it? Quite a while, in fact. Probably close to maybe 2 months now since I was able to last record a video. Well, I think it's high time that changed, so I figured today it's about time we get back into the swing of things. And I think, why not do that by talking about something simple, deceptively simple, a tool that is in the repertoire of every tabletop role player, but one that has a lot more consideration than you might realize, and that is the humble dice. Now, as most, I venture all of you probably know, pretty much every tabletop game out there requires dice to play. Dice can come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. We know, those of us who play the D20-based games, what most of these are. Now everybody knows this one. This is your standard 6-sided dice. Everybody recognizes this one. It's used in games all over the world. Everything from backgammon to liar's dice to games of chance and casinos like craps and much, much more. Now, most tabletop role-playing games, most of the big ones we know, run with the full gamut. Here, 10, or 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 20-sided dice. The D20 systems all run with all of these, naturally, Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, etc., etc. But what you might not know is all the little ins and outs, all the little considerations that we may or may not end up making with our dice, beyond just, do we like how they look? As you can see here, I've got a small variety of different dice here. Some very decorative, some much less so, some very plain, some, obviously, one in case, really, just one here, of novelty dice for specific games. This one being from HeroScape, which is sadly not made anymore. Today, I want to talk to you about the ins and outs of selecting your dice, what you want to think about, what you want to look for, and why this is important. So, we're going to enjoy some delicious cherry bounce while we talk, and let's get into it. So, why are we talking about this? Well, a few weeks ago, a friend of mine, AR Illustrations, who you will know from the many times that I have plugged our webcomic, Phoenix Rising. She's the artist for that, by the way, and we have a new episode coming out this weekend, probably today, in fact. Well, she recently showed me that she got some dice that were made for her by a friend of hers. Very nice looking dice. Semi-transparent, scintillating. They had little flakes of iridescent, scintillating flakes inside of them, and carved and painted with silver numbers. They were handcrafted, hand-molded in resin casts by a friend of hers. They were very nice to look at. But my immediate thought when I saw them was, that's really cool. They look really nice. But my God, would I not allow those at my table? Because these dice, which were just a clear resin with silvery, scintillating flake, also had silver paint for the numbers that were carved in them, making them very hard to read, even in the close-up pictures that she took. Now, she told me that in her case they were going to be used by her as the GM, which I suggested that, well, if you do that, make sure it's when you roll behind the screen, because you want your friends to be able to easily read your dice when you roll them. And as cool as those look, and as absolutely awesome as it is that your friend made that for you, The silver numbers, they look pretty, but they're real hard to read. So, that got me thinking about all the things I've learned over the years about what makes a die worthwhile. What makes one a good choice, whether it's decorative or not. What makes one a less good choice, or even potentially a bad choice. How do we determine these things? So, I figured, let's take a look at what we should look for, what we should be considering when putting together our dice. The first thing, of course, is obviously we're all going to want dice that look cool. We want our dice to appeal to us, to look neat. And I see these two sets here. These are the two newest sets that I've got. This set here you can see is a 2-color blend. You have silvery gray and orange. Kind of a neat combination that gives it a look like magma. The really nice thing about these, what really caught my eye with these, was the numbering. You've got the numbers painted with kind of a golden orange. It's similar to the color scheme of the dice. It fits with the style and the look, but they are clear and readable, even from a distance. When I roll these dice, it is easy for me to suss out, even from halfway across a table, what number I've rolled. And that's real beneficial. That's the most important thing with your dice, is you need them to be readable. You need to be able to read them from halfway across the table. Especially so that way, if you're a player, your GM can look and determine, hey, did you roll what you said you rolled? Because it helps to prevent cheating in the rare instances that happens, or maybe not so rare, depending on the groups you're playing with. This other set is similar in that sense, and I don't know how well it's going to pick up on the camera, but I really like this one because, as you can see, it's got kind of the silvered numbers. I don't think it looks too silvery on the camera. It looks more white, but they are silver. It's a sort of a light silver, maybe more of a platinum. And when the light catches them just right, you can sort of see the you can see the scintillating flake, why am I forgetting the word? The glitter inside these. What's really neat about these is they're actually semi-opaque. It doesn't pick up very well on the camera, unfortunately, but you just have to trust me on that. These dice are actually semi-opaque, and you can tell when you're looking at them in person because you can see the flake further in the die, like further below the surface. When you hold them up to the light, which I unfortunately can't really do with the way I've got my camera set up, when you hold them up to the light, you can see mostly through it. Now, why does that make a difference? Well, the advantageous thing about semi-transparent and semi-opaque dice is that because they are clear, you're able to see through them. You can ensure much more readily and much more easily that there are not going to be any weird imperfections on the inside. That's one reason why you might hear in videos that talk about dice why a lot of people tend to prefer semi-opaque, semi-transparent, or even fully transparent dice, like this one here. This is one of my oldest ones, and as you can see, the orange is fully transparent. Now, the color obviously does obscure it a bit, but you could see all the way through this thing if you hold it up to the light. And the color is an important aspect of this too, and we'll get into why color in a fully transparent die is important in a moment. But, excuse me, suffice it to say that the nice thing about semi-transparent, semi-opaque, and fully transparent die is that you can ensure that there aren't going to be any odd imperfections on the inside, whereas with solid die, even like these, you can't ensure the same thing. You could have issues where there are chunks of plastic that didn't get melted down properly in the mold, weighing down your die and affecting how they roll. And there are little tests you can do for that. Now, of course, that's a more minor issue. But if that's something you care about, well, then you may want to take that into consideration when selecting your die. That solid color dice are always going to run a higher risk of being imbalanced than semi-transparent, semi-opaque, and fully transparent die will. simply by nature of the fact that the transparency present in these other die mean that the companies have to be more careful about imperfections on the interior. If you can see through and see that there's weird chunks and imperfections, it's just going to make the dice look ugly, and of course the consumers aren't going to want to buy them. Now, like I said, that's a bit more of a minor issue, but I did mention when you're looking for transparent die especially, you would preferably want to get one that has coloration to it. Now, why is that? Well, the reason is very simple: readability. If you're going to get a transparent die like this one, you want to make sure it has color, because most often, most dies are going to have white numbering on them. And if you get a transparent die that, like this one here, this one is transparent, but it's a dark transparent. The resin itself is kind of a dark amber gray color. So the numbers are extremely readable, even from across the table. What I see happen a lot, though, is you'll find people who get transparent die, clear die, very similar to the ones that were cast for my friend. And, well, when you roll them, because they are clear, colorless die, well, those white numbers become a lot harder to read. And sometimes, albeit this is rare, when they catch the light just the right way, they can magnify numbers on the other side, and make it a little confusing. And that's definitely something you want to avoid. One of the biggest things that will slow down your game is having to take the time to roll and read your die. If you're having to waste a lot of time figuring out, well, what's the number on the die say, which was it that actually rolled, because the transparency of your die or the color of your die clashes with the color in the numbering, makes it harder to read. I mean, it's just adding up to time wasted. Yeah, maybe it's just 5-10 seconds in the moment, but if you're running a game where you're rolling die a lot, if you're running, let's say, a combat heavy session, that 5-10 seconds, depending on how often it's a problem, can add up pretty quickly. One of the other things to consider too are games that involve novelty dice, like here with Heroescape. Now, Heroescape had a reason to include novelty dice because of how the game was set up, but I'm sure you can sort of see where the problem might lie in this one. Let's see if we can't get the camera to focus on it a bit better. There we go. If you look, well, you can plainly see these numbers, these symbols, are not carved into the dice. They're painted on there. Actually, they're adhered on there like little decals, or heat treated onto the surface. If the light catches it just right, you can't see it on the camera so well, but you can see in person when the light catches it just right, that the shine of the symbols, there is the tiniest bit of surface area between them and the die. If you run your thumbnail against it, or any fingernail really gently, you can feel that too. There's a little bit of texture there. And what's the problem with dice like this? Well, obviously, because it's just painted or glued onto the surface, over time it's going to chip, fade away, and then eventually you're just going to be left with a white cube. Doesn't really help anybody. Novelty dice and games with novelty dice can be fun, most certainly. Some of them are very well designed, but the problem with novelty dice is twofold. One, oftentimes they're cheaply made, so you'll run into balancing issues, things like that. Two, it might be cheaply made in the case like this, where the numbers or the symbols are just adhered and painted on the surface, which means they're going to fade over time and you're just going to have to buy new ones. So it's more money that you have to spend. Additionally, well, it's an extra cost investment that really you oftentimes don't need. A lot of the times these games that involve novelty dice, if you can find out how many symbols are on the die, usually it is 6, you can just assign them to the numbers on a regular 6-sided die. So, much of the time I find that novelty dice, while a novelty, aren't really worth it. There are exceptions though, like these guys. These guys are pretty cool. Little numbered 6-sided die, but for the one, you get a skull and crossbone. It's novel, it's interesting, it's a regular die in every other way except for that. And since it's carved in, well, it's not going to fade and chip away. It still works perfectly serviceably as a rollable 6-sided die. Hey, double fours, all right. Now, you'll notice, too, that I've also got a collection of tiny dice here. These, I'm pretty sure, all came from some travel game set or another. And you might think, like, oh, that might be kind of fun, that might be kind of cool, but consider how often and how easily we can lose track of our dice when rolling at a table. What if we get excited and we roll too hard, and the die you're using is a quarter the size of a regular 6-sided die, like this one. You're going to have a whole hell of a lot of a harder time finding it, even if you use one like this, just half the size. It's just going to be that much harder to find it. So while these things are great for travel games when you're out on the road, doing board games with your friends while you're camping or something, really, I don't see the point. This is not that much smaller than this. This is already plenty small. It's not especially oversized or fancy or anything like that. It fits easily in the palm of your hand. In fact, the full set of 7, plus 1 from the other die, all fit very easily in the palm of my hand. I don't need a bunch of tiny dice to do that. I don't need a bunch of tiny dice to take with me traveling, and I don't need a bunch of tiny dice that are very hard to read from a distance at my table, and neither do you. Now, you might think, oh, alright, obviously we've covered everything there is to cover, yeah? No. There's one more point I want to make, and unfortunately, I don't have one of these for myself. There's a good reason for that. Metal dice. Metal dice. Metal dice and metal dice. God, they're so cool. They feel so weighty. They feel so satisfying to roll. And boy, will they chip the hell out of your table. Metal dice are a point of contention for me. But also something I'm kind of wishy-washy on. Because really it depends kind of who you're playing with. Now, let me make it clear. The big draw of metal dice, apart from the weightiness, is the fact that a lot of companies, a lot of independent dice makers who make metal dice are able to do really fancy, intricate etching and design work on them. I've seen a set before that I thought looked absolutely awesome. I was really tempted to buy them. It's steampunk metal dice with gears inlaid into it, and the numbers were set on large gears that rested on the top. They looked awesome. I didn't end up doing it because I would have ended up spending $40 or $50 for a set of 7 dice that I was never going to use. And the reason I was never going to use that is because not only were those numbers hard to read, but the many sharp edges on the dice, the many sharp corners because of the fancy design, were going to chip the hell out of my tables. And since when I play in person, I play at my dining table, I don't really want to chip that. Now, if you're playing on a table that you don't really care gets chipped, like, say, the gaming table that my friends up north made, where they just took a large piece of plywood, stapled a pirate's flag onto it, and just set that on top of a large empty electrical wire spool, yeah, that's fine. You can roll metal dice on that all the time, and it's not going to matter if it gets chipped. It's a $10 plank of particle board that you can get at Home Depot or Lowe's or any other hardware store for, the change in your wallet, generally speaking. Or that you can probably just find randomly on the side of the road. Hell, I've got one about the size that they found just sitting against the racking at work that came on a pallet that was sent to us a few weeks ago. If you're rolling on a surface like that, well, chipping with the metal dice doesn't matter. But then the readability issue comes into play. Now, metal dice that are designed just more like a regular die. My buddy's got a metal D20 it's like a regular D20, like this guy here, or this red one here. Just a little bit larger and made of metal, probably about 50% bigger than this, and made of metal with black numbers etched into it, so it's easily readable. I'm perfectly okay with people using that at a table that the people or person who owns the table doesn't care if it's going to get chipped from the dice. And like I said, I care about my dining table getting chipped from the dice, so I wouldn't allow it. But here's the other thing to consider. Well, two other things to consider. One, if you've got a fancy, really well designed, like neat looking set of metal dice, for one thing, if they've got a bunch of fancy edges, etching, and all that stuff, all that rolling over time is going to dent and deface and scratch that die. With plastic, that's not as big a deal. Plastic is a lot cheaper, a lot easier to replace. If these dice get scratched and scuffed over time, that's fine. First of all, it's going to take a long time for it to hit a point where it's unusable and looks bad. Secondly, even if it does get scuffed up, I can go to the gaming store or go online and replace this set of 7 dice for like $10. Probably even a little bit less. It depends on how fancy it was made. But plastic is always going to be cheaper than metal, generally speaking. So there's that. And then there's the other issue where with metal dice, the people who design them try to get a little bit more flair, a little bit more fancy, and sometimes will come up with unusual designs that make it so the dice aren't immediately readable as what they are. I've seen sets of metal dice where they are like cylinders with multiple sides, and then the numbers are etched into the sides. Well, if you're rolling a bunch of random cylinders, I'm not going to immediately recognize that, oh, one of those is a 4-sided dice, one of those is a 6-sided dice, one of those is an 8-sided dice. They all look like a bunch of cylinders. That's another problem with metal dice, is when they tend to get fancy and try new weird designs that reshape the wheel. But I think we all know what the real problem with metal dice is. Yes, I think we all know what the real problem with metal dice is. When you drop them on the floor and those sharp edges are out, and you're looking around in your socks and you step on it. Yeah, for me, that reason alone is more than enough not to buy some metal dice. But really, I'm just being kind of cheeky with that one, because let's face it, any die hurts to step on. Man, you parents who complain about stepping on Legos, or you kids out there who've complained about stepping on Legos, you don't know pain until you've stepped on a 4-sided die. So what have we learned here today? In summation, the kind of things you want to look for with your dice. First and foremost, numbers that are easily readable at any point by anyone at your table. Secondly, semi-opaque to fully transparent dice. But if fully transparent, make sure it's colored and that the numbers, again, are readable. Most important part. That will help with balance and ensuring that the quality of the die is more uniform. And lastly, avoid the novelty dice. Don't go in on the weird, crazy cylinder dice. Don't go in for the ones that have special symbols for the different numbers or crazy fancy etching. And if you do, keep them as showpieces. They're fun to own. I get the appeal. They're neat. They look cool. It's fun having cool looking dice when you play tabletop games, but functionally, they're not that good for the table. And so, friends and gamers, we reached the end of what is, a much longer than intended video on dice. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Have you had any negative experiences with people using odd novelty dice? Have you had issues with metal dice or anything like that? What kind of dice do you have? What sort of rules do you have at your tables for allowing dice? And have you ever really considered all these little aspects and angles that really do exist when we're trying to decide on what dice we're going to choose and how we're going to pick our sets? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. If you like the video, please feel free to leave it a like, subscribe If you would like to see more, follow me on my social media presences. You can find them linked in the description down below. Most importantly, though, make sure to follow the link over to Webtoons to read my webcomic, Phoenix Rising. We are going to, like I said, be posting the next installment today. In fact, actually, I think by the time this video goes up, the most recent episode should already be live. Not 100% sure about that, but it should be live. If not, then it will be live tomorrow on Sunday. So make sure to check that out and let me know what you think there. And let me just say, friends and gamers, it's good to be back. And I think I'm going to start working harder at getting back into the swing of things and no longer letting work interfere with my life as opposed to support it. So, once again, dear friends and gamers of all stripes, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen. And remember, in the world of tabletop gaming, it is important that you don't just watch. Get out there and game. Cheers.